have a quick confession to make, which I often do before I start these videos. I had promised myself that I would wait to start writing this essay until at least December 14th. However, I spiraled my way into 8,000 words of a Fire Country fanfiction outline, so to ensure that I did not just spiral further, I started this video a week early. You see, I had hoped that we would have Luke back before the show went on its winter break, since Max Theriot promised that Luke would be coming back for the back half of the season. Traditionally, the back half starts in episode 8 or 9, but I wasn't quite sure what back half meant, since, we're not going on break until episode 9. Thankfully, my spidey senses were completely correct on this. Luke showed up in season 4, episode 8, Fresh Start, and I spent the entire episode grinning like an idiot. That being said, Sharon and Luke do not interact at all in this episode, and I'm only going to talk about it a little bit in this video. Fresh Start was Luke's second episode of the season, with Goodbye for Now being the first. I think Goodbye for Now is one of the most important episodes when it comes to Sharon and Luke's dynamics. Well, I've been planning this video out since about mid-August. It wasn't until I watched Goodbye for Now in mid-October that I really understood where I was going to be going. Because in that episode, everything, and I mean everything about Sharon and Luke's dynamic just really starts to make sense. What makes this difficult with making a video about Sharon and Luke, if we had a hot-cold love-hate relationship on TV, we would just call it a slow burn that's going faster than normal. But also, it makes it a little weird since, Sharon is married to Luke's brother, and Luke's brother dies at the end of season 3. Well, I suppose technically in the first scene of season 4. As I often do when I bring up fanfiction or media terms, it's important to go over what a slow burn is. The basic idea of a slow burn is that a media property is making us wistful for a relationship with the promise that they will give it to us at some point. When I think about a slow burn, I think of House and Cuddy. It was always quite clear that their biting remarks had a sexual undertone and they would eventually get together. But they didn't get together until my favorite episode of House Help Me, the season 6 finale. But I'm not certain that all slow burns are actually intended as slow burns. Take one of the most famous examples on network TV, Bensler, the ship name for Olivia Benson and Elliot Stabler. If for some reason you've never heard of this ship, I congratulate you. Law & Order SVU is a show that I wish I could forget about, but Dick Wolf's regressive politics are not the subject of this video. Actually, I've linked a really good 12-hour deep dive on every single moment between Olivia and Elliot. If you're wondering why it's 12 hours, just remember that they were on a show together for 12 seasons. And I believe that at the time of the video, there had been one season of organized crime. The first mini seasons of SVU had Olivia and Elliot as the typical cross-gendered body cop relationship. It wasn't until later where the fans started shipping them that SVU leaned more into this dynamic. I've been tossing this over in my mind for several months now, and it's really hard to tell if Sharon and Luke are meant to be a slow burn. It feels really weird to call Sharon and Luke an intended couple since, she was married to Vince, but so many of their interactions are sharp and they have this playfulness to them. I know this feels like a weird contradiction, but actually when I was watching Goodbye for Now for the first time, or maybe it was the second time, everything about their dynamic kind of just clicked into place. In Goodbye for Now, Sharon and Luke have about 4 scenes. They have the funeral scenes, then they have the scene about 8 weeks later where Luke comes to make Sharon a meal. However, this is sidetracked when she learns that Luke betrayed her by bringing Walter to talk to her without her consent. A few scenes later, we see Luke dressed in his CAL FIRE uniform about to go to work, apologizing to Sharon for bringing Walter to see her. While there, he misinterprets what she says and thinks that she wants him to call Cal Fire on Station 42. She very much does not. Then, the last we see of him before his return and fresh start is Luke and Sharon getting into an argument about Brett showing up at the station. Eve didn't even invite Luke over to Vince's birthday dinner, but he may have been back in Japan at that point. Actually, a quick tangent. I think people are massively underestimating how much Luke is currently suffering. Vince has been a part of Luke's life since Luke has existed, even if they didn't always get along. They worked together closely for about 30 years. Luke also shows over and over parentification behaviors towards Vince, so I can only imagine the feelings that he's going through right now. And for a while there, it felt very weird because everybody was allowed to be upset about Vince's death, except for Luke. It was very nice to give Luke a moment that highlighted his grief in Fresh Start when he gets emotional about signing Bodhi's Proby book, which he said was always Vince's dream. But that is enough of Luke's thoughts on Vince. This video is about his tenuous relationship with Sharon. I think it's time to talk about Luke's scenes with Sharon in Goodbye for Now. And in particular, I want to look at the third scene between them when he is coming to apologize for bringing Walter. This scene truly is the Rosetta Stone of Luke and Sharon, and it's how I figured out their pattern, which is what I'm going to be walking you through in this video. When Luke shows up, Sharon is quick to not let him in the house. He says he didn't realize how traumatizing Walter's presence would be, and she calls this absurd. She does let him in, and they sit on the couch together, the first time they've sat on the couch together on screen since he asked her for an affair. Luke explains the primary reason he brought Walter isn't just because both Walter and Sharon know what it's like to lose a child, but because it was a trauma that Walter and Sharon survived together. Therefore, something that he can't properly support either of them through. Sharon is quick to say that Luke was gone because he was off in Japan doing whatever it is he does in Japan. Luke responds that it is unfair for her to blame him for Vince's death just because he was off doing his job. That's when Sharon says that it's her fault and she's waiting for punishment, which Luke misinterprets as a cue to call Cal Fire. But there's something about this that bothered me. I understand that Sharon feels angry that Luke wasn't there to help them with Walter. While never explicitly stated, it does seem a little suspicious that he announced that he's moving to another continent one episode after his dad shows up at Station 42 due to a memory lapse. While Vince is effectively no contact with Walter, Luke does things for him all the time, and it seems unlikely Luke didn't know that his dad was suffering from cognitive decline. But that doesn't mean Luke leaving was entirely his fault. Luke wasn't simply quitting a job to take a promotion in another country. Instead, he tells Vince in the Leone way that he's leaving the country because Sharon fired him, and this is a job she can't take. Vince lightheartedly agrees before they toast a beer together. That firing came in the season 2 finale I Do, and this firing happened for two reasons. One which was absolutely true, and one which was absolutely false. The true one, and I think the one that we point to most, is that he tries to close down 3 Rock. This is upsetting to Sharon not just because 3 Rock was the prison camp under her command and a place she was captain over for many years, but because her son was still an inmate at 3 Rock with a year left in his sentence, and he had previously almost died when he was in custody. Sending Bodhi away could fairly be interpreted by Sharon and Vince as a death sentence, so it's understandable she would fire Luke for his treachery. The second one, though, I think that's something that the fandom still thinks is true, even though it's most certainly false, and that's that Luke tried to get Mandy sent to prison. I don't blame people for thinking this because Sharon says it to him directly. Oh, you're so smug because the charges you pressed stuck. And while Luke does deny it, I can't deny the giddiness on his face when he says it. If we hadn't been in the room in season 3 when the district attorney tells us it was the governor's office like Luke said, I would probably accuse him of lying too. So, taking this into consideration, what you really have in that scene between Luke and Sharon sitting on the couch where she's upset with him leaving for Japan is a problem of tracing the origins of the fight. Yes, it is true that Luke left during the time when Walter had dementia, but also Sharon fired him and she sided with Manny in a way that made it quite clear she did not want Luke to be here. Now she's angry that he didn't stay. And while Luke doesn't explicitly say, "I left because you wanted me to leave," right to her face, he does explicitly say, "I'm leaving because Sharon stole my job," to Vince in the same episode where he announces that he's going to Japan. But, I've seen this dynamic before. Okay, not in an entirely fictional property, though I'll have to admit that at a certain point, biofics are somewhat fictional. As I was working on this video, I couldn't ignore the fact that this reminded me exactly of Robert J. Oppenheimer and Jane Tatlock in the movie Oppenheimer. Specifically, I'm thinking about the scene where Oppenheimer tells Jane that he conceived a child with Kitty and now he's going to marry her. Throughout the first part of the movie, Jean and Oppenheimer have a relationship that is both highly intellectual and highly fraught. They can go from having sex to her yelling at him and throwing flowers in the trash like it's nothing. When I think about that and I line it up to Sharon and Luke, a highly intellectual emotional relationship that blows up like dynamite, it's the exact same, but without the sex. I want to walk you through the entirety of Sharon and Luke's relationship on screen, starting with Get Some Be Safe and ending with Goodbye for Now to show you what I'm talking about. I want to affirm one more time before we get into Sharon and Luke having this emotional but not sexual high tension relationship that it feels weird, and I get it. I pride myself on being a huge LGBTQ plus advocate and a pro-polyamory person, but I understand and acknowledge that the idea of one person being in love with two men who are literally brothers is deeply weird and feels uncomfortable. However, this is what the show gives us, and this is what I'm going to be working with. If you've never watched any of my videos before, you might not know this, but I don't do just straight recaps. Instead, what I'm going to do is show patterns and behaviors that point to something. What I think is incredibly interesting about Sharon and Luke is how they have a very clear pattern between them. The pattern is simple. They are getting along well, someone makes a mistake, the other person blows up, and the mistake maker goes into exile. Eventually, one of the two apologizes, they make up, and everything is stable, at least for now. You might think, wow, this sounds an awful lot like the cycle of abuse, and my answer to that is that not all cyclical relationships are abusive. Some of them are just toxic. One thing that I have learned in doing all of my abuse work, working on the Leone family essays, is that the cycle of abuse is just one pattern of abuse. It keeps the victim on their toes and constantly afraid of the next disproportionate blow up. And I don't mean to say that any relationship that has rough patches is toxic or abusive. That's incredibly unfair. Life just is that way. With Sharon and Luke, though, the problem is that it works like clockwork. And the main reason I signal this out as toxic and not abusive is that it's not one-sided. It's not one person tiptoeing and the other person exploding irrationally. Sharon and Luke often do things that are incredibly fucked up to each other. The other person is usually rightfully angry, and eventually the person who made the mistake, whichever one of them it was, comes back and apologizes. Then they're fine again. While Luke is only in 15 episodes of Fire Country as of the time of recording, we get many iterations of this cycle. It just goes over and over again in a way that I find kind of interesting. When I pulled this essay out of my season 1 lineup, it was because I didn't think that I could possibly go over all of their dynamic just looking at season 1. But in this cycle, we see two different of these cycles, and I really want to go over those two. The first cycle for Sharon and Luke happens in the episodes Get Some Be Safe, Like Old Times, and Bad Guy. When we first meet Luke, he's off seeing Bodhi, but then it's not too long until he's at Smokey's and Sharon gives him a hug. They banter back and forth a bit, including about Sharon's brother, who, yes, did exist all the way back in season 1, and I know I'm probably the only person who knew that. Later in the episode, she defends him when Vince says that Luke is only in town to show him up. She admits an episode later in Like Old Times that she suspects that Luke is trying to steal her job, though Vince says Luke wouldn't do that. Unfortunately, this means that when she gets an email from the CAL FIRE board telling her she's been placed on medical leave, she has already decided Luke's guilt. But because he's completely innocent, he legitimately has no idea why she's storming into Smokey's and hitting the menu out of his hand. He doesn't confess because he's innocent, but he doesn't deny the accusations either, and she storms out. Vince tries to stop her, but she doesn't stop. A couple scenes later, Luke explains to Vince that he knew that he had to take the fall because Vince was guilty and she was going to need someone to not be angry with. However, Vince isn't able to stay quiet for forever, and 2 episodes later, in Bad Guy, while he and Sharon are cuddling on the couch, he tells her that he was the one who turned her in. She's incredibly angry at him and also at Luke because she sees this as the brothers handling her. I consider this to be like the little baby prototype version of this cycle for us to see. They're all happy at the beginning of Get Some Be Safe, and she's understandably pissed in Like Old Times if you consider her point of view that he's guilty, and as soon as she finds out that he isn't guilty, she apologizes and brings him back. This feeds into our reconciliation/calm period. She invites Luke over, and because Luke is in love with her and also a massive ham, he brings her a puzzle to put together. The two go off in this dining room that's not the main dining room that we don't see very often, and they put it together. He tries to interrogate her about the deal with Manny to keep Bodhi at 3 Rock, and this is something I'm going to have to get into in Luke's Part 2 essay. All you need to know is that he parlays this into a clumsy attempt to ask for an affair, and while she is technically blowing up at him, this isn't the actual blow up of the cycle. Instead, the blow-up is in Mama Bear. It happens when Sharon says to Vince and Luke, the Leone brothers and their lack of boundaries, after Vince loans Manny 10 grand, which Manny immediately gambled away. This causes tension between the brothers, and eventually Luke is gone. We don't see him again until at the end of my rope. Actually, interestingly enough, as of recording, this is the longest stretch of time that we've ever not had a Luke episode. The second longest streak is 7 episodes between My Team and Goodbye for Now, though we hear about Luke several times during that streak. While Sharon was the one to initiate the reconciliation in Bad Guy, Luke is the one to start the reconciliation in At the End of My Rope. Luke brings his 80-year-old father Walter so that he and Vincent convince him to have hip surgery. There's honestly no good reason why it had to be right here, so I kind of consider this to just be Luke's attempt to get FaceTime with Sharon. He's been trying to reconcile with her through text, email, and food delivery, but she says Luke's offense is not something that can be fixed with soup. However, we know that he does eventually fix their issues because by the end of Backfire, he's secretly calling her on the phone and she lies to Vince as they arrange the kidney donation. Then, when she runs off to go die, she's just like, here you go, take my job. So while this cycle is longer, it definitely shows the same pattern. They're on good terms up until he tells Vince that he asked her for an affair. She and Vince are angry at him, so he goes and runs away until he forces himself back into the picture, and the two of them make up. We see both Luke and Sharon initiate reconciliation depending on who did something wrong. In addition, what Luke does wrong is something very wrong. Sharon's not overreacting when she gets angry with him. It is legitimately hurtful to think that Luke, who is implied to have also applied for division chief at the same time she did, might tell the board she was sick so that she would be put on leave and he would become the interim. Likewise, I really hope I don't need to explain the boundary violation that is first asking for an affair and then telling her husband that he asked her for an affair. Actually, yes, I do. You see, this is where people just really, really don't like Luke. They see him as a massive creep, and while I don't necessarily feel the need to defend Luke's honor, I do need to defend Sharon. Not from Luke, mind you. Sharon can do that all on her own, but specifically from this infantilizing misogyny that society puts on women. I know that after my Sharon essay and Eve essay, you're probably like, my goodness, when is she going to stop talking about misogyny? And the answer to that is probably never, unfortunately, because I think misogyny exists in literary spaces. It's something that is weaponized by feminists and by overt misogynists. There's also a huge amount of misogyny in fandom spaces, particularly in regards to the idea of the perfect woman. I mean, take Brightheart from the Warrior Cats book series. The series already has a problem of giving female characters one single personality. I get it, they have like hundreds of background characters and they can't all have distinct personalities, but Brightheart is literally just a stock female character with a backstory of nearly being murdered by dogs. The only time she shows actual personality is the back half of The New Prophecy, when she's upset because she thinks she's going to get a divorce from Cloudtail, and then again in the site. Actually, her plotline from the site is really the only thing about her that's not just stock background female Warrior Cats character. She's objectively doing ableism against J-Paw, and she's also teaching him to accept ableism from other people. However, because she is a generic female character and he is an angsty teenage boy, apparently their maturity differences don't matter. Brightheart is like 7 months younger than Firestar, and J-Paw is literally Firestar's grandchild. This difference just completely disappears to people. Also, the assets you are seeing on the screen right now are from YouTubers Sunnyfall and Moonkitty, and I should clarify that they absolutely do not agree with my anti-Brightheart opinions. So, with this extensive rant about misogyny in mind, I want to go over the quasi-romantic parts of Sharon and Luke's relationship. The problem here is that if I just went over them in chronological order, we would be missing something. Yeah, sure, bad guy is the third episode that we see Luke in, but it's not like they met in Get Some Be Safe and 4 weeks later he's asking her to have an affair. These two have a long-standing history, and I think that if we work from back to front, starting with Goodbye for Now and ending with the affair attempt, we're going to see something a little different. Also, this is specifically going to be their more charged moments, not the entire plot, and certainly not the entire plot of Season 2, because this essay does not need to be 3 hours long. As of recording, the most recent episode out is Fresh Start. Sharon and Luke don't so much as say each other's name in that episode. So instead, we'll start with Goodbye for Now, and you have to admit, there is something kind of flirty about Sharon and Luke's kitchen conversation. Not in a, wow, Vince is dead and she's immediately trying to replace him sort of way. More of a, her husband is dead and her other partner is now trying to help take care of her kind of way. He challenges her, she retorts, and everything's good until Walter comes in and fucks it up. When Luke tries to comfort her after triggering her, she screams at him to go away. I wouldn't quite say they flirt when he comes back to apologize for bringing Walter to her, but they're definitely, somewhat friendly until she realizes that Station 42 has unbenched themselves. At the end of the episode, we find out he called Cal Fire on 42, and he goes away for a little while. The previous time we had seen him was in My Team, his last night before moving to Japan. Sharon and Vince were having a conversation about Renee, wherein Vince was trying to keep them apart, so Sharon never learned that he proposed to Renee when they were teens. Luke walks in and jokes about how Renee is a troublemaker, then plays a Japanese translation of Hey ladies, I'm single on his phone, which Sharon laughs at. The moment is rudely interrupted by Bodhi having Bodhi problems, and Vince looks uncomfortable. We only have to jump back 3 episodes to the Leone way to get Luke again. At the beginning of the episode, Sharon is trying to convince Vince that Walter is having cognitive decline, and when he deflects, she says she's going to have better luck with Luke. However, Luke quickly proves he is just as much in denial about Walter's dementia as Vince is, and he jokes that she's just jealous that she can't go on their boys' trip. She lets him know the joke wasn't funny, and Vince breaks up the banter, telling Luke to go put things in the car. Really, though, we get the bulk of Sharon and Luke's quasi-romantic behavior in the Season 2 finale I Do and the Season 3 premiere with The Bride Said. I'm going to flip these two and go over them in chronological order so you can understand the whole breadth of what is taking place between these two. These episodes take place over, 3 days, but the bulk of the drama between Sharon and Luke takes place over 6 hours between when he shows up at Gabriella's wedding and when they walk away arms locked to go talk about Bodhi. While Manny is sneaking around trying to steal a necklace that's placed in his locker, Sharon sees Luke at the station. She accuses him of lurking around, but he says he's division chief. She corrects him. He's temporarily division chief and accuses him of gloating about Manny being charged with the crime after, lighting a guy on fire. Luke is so busy gloating about how someone other than him pressed charges against Manny that he doesn't do a very good job convincing Sharon that someone else did it. They talk about who was right when they had their deal with the governor in the gala episode, and he says he can't believe he ever risked his relationship with Vince to ask her to have sex. She laughs that he thought that she would agree to have sex with him. At the wedding, she tells Luke she's going to take her job back. He says he likes her job, and she says too bad. After the helicopter crashes into the wedding, Luke handles chiefing the rescue while Sharon handles triage. He tries to help her adjust her shoes. She smacks his hand. He tells her Bodhi asked him to help break the rules, get him into Cal Fire, and she's interested. It's not long after that she locks arms with him and they walk away together scheming on how to use insider politics to help Bodhi. He also gets brownie points by not letting the cops take Manny to jail right away. Next, you would probably guess that I was going to talk about It's Not Over, but it's really hard to talk about It's Not Over without talking about all the politics stuff, and the politics stuff is staying out of this video. That's a Season 2 essay. Instead, I want to head to the front of Season 2 with Something's Coming. We don't really know the full extent of stuff that happened between Luke and Sharon with this episode. We know that she told him she was coming back to Edgewater, and she rode with him to the site of the Belinus fire to surprise Vince. At the end of the episode, Luke makes the three of them dinner, and she tells him to stay out of her marriage. When Vince walks in, Luke remembers that he forgot the wine, and Sharon and Vince have a kiss that is the closest thing we ever get to them having sex in canon. Okay, yes, they have sex in canon in Firing Line, but are you honestly going to tell me that this is the same as this? Didn't think so. Moving into Season 1, the last time Sharon and Luke are together and actually speak to each other is in her hospital room during I Know It Feels Impossible. She had texted him that she landed in the hospital and he came to check on her, even though she told him not to. Vince starts to get upset that maybe they are sleeping together, and Sharon says they're not sleeping together, Luke's just giving her a kidney. When they decided this isn't clear, but I'm guessing it was some point after At the End of My Rope, since at the beginning of that episode, she just said, nope, not doing it, and walked out. Which is fair because, the last time that she had seen him before the end of my rope was in Mama Bear, when she was so angry at Vince for giving Manny $10K that she accidentally told both brothers that they needed to learn what boundaries are, which led to Vince finding out that Luke asked her for an affair. Speaking of that affair ask, I suppose we've made our way back to Bad Guy. For my first several watches, I forgot the Bad Guy was the episode where Luke asked her for an affair, which made my mom crack up because she's like, can't you tell how much he's flirting with her? And I suppose part of that is that she is matching his intensity. I mean, sure, when he cornered her about Manny keeping Bodhi at 3 Rock, she was on edge, but pretty soon after, they were back sitting on the couch laughing where he jokes about her having an affair with Manny, which she doesn't immediately shut down, and he pushes further, which makes her explode because we don't have sex, I'm married to your brother, seems like a pretty clear boundary. I don't think I need to go over Get Some Be Safe or Like Old Times, but basically, they flirt and are sweet to each other. She defends him to Vince, and when she thinks he's sold her out, she explodes. Also, Vince takes her home, and frankly, if my wife had tried to kill herself on a motorcycle and she was once again heated and getting ready to leave, I don't think I'd want her driving away in that state either, just as a safety precaution. You're probably noticing by now that there is a ginormous Manny-shaped hole in this essay, and there's a reason for that. You see, I'll admit that when I wrote Luke's essays, I wanted to give him 2 because I wanted to be able to separate out his role as the family caregiver away from the frankly absurd jealousy of Manny. Well, you would probably expect that Luke's jealousy of Manny should go right here. Instead, that's really what I'm going to be talking about in his part 2 essay. I think it's just incredibly funny that Manny has no fucking clue that Luke is insanely jealous of him. And really, Luke's jealousy of Manny isn't necessary to understand the relationship between Sharon and Luke. If anything, the relationship between Sharon and Luke is necessary to understand his jealousy of Manny. At the end of the day, I do want to clarify that I don't like just labeling things misogyny. Even when things are misogynistic, I will admit that sometimes using the word can kind of pull the meaning out of it. But as I've already talked about, I think that robbing women of their complexity is a form of it. You don't have to like that the show writes Sharon and Luke as having a quasi-romantic relationship, but making it a one-sided relationship where Luke is a creep and Sharon doesn't like him flattens her enormously. The concept of love has always been complicated in the Fire Country universe. The number of episodes where Bodhi doesn't have a love interest and no other guy is in the way is in the single digits. But the fandom doesn't seem to have a problem with that. On the other hand, while I wouldn't say that Sharon identifies her feelings towards Luke as romantic, the important part here is how they're framed on screen. In any other show, we would call this what it is, a situationship or a complicated relationship. However, Vince and Sharon have a reputation for being the perfect couple on network TV. So maybe Sharon does have feelings for Luke, and Luke clearly has feelings for her. And those two things don't change by her relationship with Vince being the perfect representation of a married couple. Perhaps it was the fact that we were, 8 episodes in when he makes a move on her that makes us flatten their dynamic down into one person chasing and one person wanting to be left alone. But at the end of the day, Sharon and Luke have known each other for over 35 years, and short of us actually getting that spinoff that Diane Farr joked about, I don't think we're ever really going to know the origin of how this deal between Sharon and Luke started, or if the characters themselves even recognized when it started. That's really the whole reason I wanted to make this video, to let whatever Sharon and Luke have exist in a liminal space where it's real, but we can name it without shaming either party. I want to thank you so much for watching this mid-season video. I'm currently doing a lot of enjoying break. I had an entire week where I spiraled into fanfiction, and then another partial week where I kept spiraling until I decided to start writing this video. Hopefully, I'm going to be making a Warrior Cats video soon, but frankly, I'm not sure how I would do that because I do not want to be on camera for the entire length of a video. After that, I'm going to be back with my essay about queer coding around Vince, and 2 weeks after that, my friends voted for a video on explaining how music is actually the narrator of Fire Country. I expect to be back with my Gabriella video on February 21st, and it's going to be nice to write a video where Canon won't come in and ruin everything before it goes live, because it has literally happened with every single thing that I have written since I started working on video essays while the show was actually going. All right, take care, everybody.